Alright, welcome back to the Roblox course, and in this lecture we're going to talk about Roblox Studio and some functionalities and basically a short overview of how the studio works. So first things first, we're going to create a new project here, and we're going to do this by just selecting the base plate again. And this should be similar looking to this. If this is your first time opening Roblox Studio, there might be some other windows here. And we're going to look at that part, piece by piece. So first things first, as you can see, this really big window here, this is the base plate. And the way we can move around in this is when we right-click the mouse, we can, turn the camera around. We can zoom in and out with the mouse wheel. And also, if we press the mouse wheel, we can sort of walk along something like this. We can also use W, A, S, and D to move around. If we hold shift, we move slowly. And if we let go of shift, then we move fast. This is a basic movement here inside of the camera view, let's say. We also have this cube up here in the top right, where we can get sort of defined views here. So back, right, front, left. We can look at that as well. But for now, our basic movement tools are going to be fine. Now, if we have this select tool here selected, right? So we have a normal one, then we can actually, with the left click, draw and select things. Now, right now, we don't have anything in here in our workspace, but this is going to change. We're going to look at this. But first of all, I would say put your eyes up here to this part of the Roblox Studio. So we have a few tabs: Home, Model, Test, View, and Plugins. Now, for ourselves, View right now is interesting because in here we can actually turn on and off certain windows inside of Roblox Studio. So for example, hey, I really want the toolbox, and then we can have the toolbox seen, and we can either disable it by clicking it here again or clicking the X that also disables it. We can look at the Game Explorer. Now, in this case, there's nothing in there because we don't have the game published yet. But for example, an Object Explorer just gives you every object that there is. You can look at the command bar down here. We have some other things that can be interesting. So script performance, for example, there's something there when we can look at the performance of certain scripts. But right now, all we really care about is the base plate, so this camera window, the output, the properties, and the Explorer. Those are like the main 4 windows that we need. And if we have those, then everything is fine. And the rest right now really doesn't concern us. We're gonna build up on that. Now, when we go back to Home, we have multiple things. So as you can see, we have the Select tool, a Move tool, Scale and Rotate tool. Now, we're going to look at those after we've added a new part. And how can we add a new part? Well, skipping over a few things. So the terrain editor is not going to concern us right now, and the toolbox is what we've just opened there. So if we can also open the toolbox here, but we don't need that right now. What we want to have is a part. And if we simply click this part, as you can see, the tooltip already says place a part in the workspace. So if we click this, there we go. A part has been placed inside of our workspace. And as you can see right to the right here in the Explorer, this part is below workspace, and it's right here. Now we can see the properties here, and we're going to go through properties in another lecture. So we're going to look at those in detail in another lecture. But right now, we only want to look at what can we do with this part. Well, first of all, this is now not selected anymore, so we don't see any properties. We can select it by either clicking on it, and then we have it selected, or we can, of course, drag and then select even multiple ones. In this case, we only have the one part. Now, when we switch to different tools up here, we can, for example, switch to the Move tool, and then we're going to see something like this. And if we hover over these arrows, as you can see, they get a little bit bigger, and then we can, if we left-click and then drag it, we can actually drag it along this axis and change its position of the part. We can also scale it. So scaling is pretty much exactly the same along a certain dimension. if we hit Shift while we scale, we can actually scale in all directions simultaneously. And yeah, and then rotating should be self-explanatory. We can simply rotate around a certain axis and a certain angle. Yeah, and that is pretty much the tools up here. Also important, when we have this hand, we can actually left click and keep left clicking, and then we can also move this around. This is a little less accurate, I would say, than the move tool. When we press Control Z for the Windows, it should be Command Z for Mac. Then we can go back, and Command Y or Control Y is going to be putting redoing it. So this is also those two, undoing and redoing. Maybe if you've worked with some other program, you have seen that before. Right, so this part right now, as I've said, those are some of the things that we can do. Now, there are also other things. For example, we see here, when we go to model, we can actually see a whole bunch of stuff that we could do in theory. And when we move it, we can say how much we want to move it by, right? So it the positioning, or I would say the distances here, are measured in studs, right? And the rotation can also be locked. Now we can also unlock it and then rotate this thing however little we want. So now it's sort of a smooth rotation. Usually it makes sense to sort of snap it to the grid, simply because then you can build a little nicer and not have, like weird angles, let's say. So if I rotate it by 1.258 degrees, that's going to be a little weird, especially if I have multiple ones next to each other. It's going to look weird. So we could change the material, as you can see here. So for example, we could make this metal. It's going to change its appearance a little bit. Slate. We're actually going to get a texture here. Or let's say marble. Also kind of nice. So this is a possible material. We're going to look into that later as well. And then we can also change the color. So those are brick colors. We're going to look at those in a later lecture in even more detail. For now, it's really good. We can just change the color of this part. In this case, let's say, for example, yellow. And now we also have a surface possibility here, but we're not going to look at that at this moment in time. I just want to tell you that these are some of the things that we can do immediately inside of Roblox Studio. And of course, later down the line, we are going to learn how to use them in scripts and how we can change them in scripts, right? So how we can change properties in scripts, how we can change the part, the materials, the color of the surface, and all of that. And yeah, those are some basic, let's say, movements and controls that are in Roblox Studio. What I definitely advise is just playing around a little bit, especially with the camera controls, right? Right-clicking to move the camera, middle mouse to move around, or WASD. And yeah, and maybe even moving around the pieces a little bit, making them a little bit bigger, rotating them, just so you get a little bit of a feel of how this works, because this is something that we're going to do, quite a lot. One last trick, let's say, or one last thing that you can do is when you have a piece selected, you can press Control C to copy it, and then Control V to paste it in again. On Mac, once again, this should be Command C and Command V. And this simply then copies the piece. Now, what is important is that they will have the same name, which going forward, when we use scripts to, let's say, change up our parts, this can lead to conflicts, but we're going to see this later when we use our scripts. And yeah, so this is a basic overview, let's say, over the most basic of functionality of Roblox Studio. Of course, there's way more. And going forward, we're going to learn even more things about both the program and scripting. But this as a first overview. If there are any questions, of course, feel free to ask. And yeah.